ESM Goh Chok Tong, Professor Houston Kwa, Excellencies and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me to the Economic Society of Singapore's annual dinner. As Houston said just now, my first job in 1997 was a research economist at MTI. So it's certainly good to be in a room with fellow economists and to see many familiar faces. I did a lot of work on macroeconomic modeling when I started work, forecasting GDP growth, analyzing the impact of exogenous shocks on the economy. That was my bread and butter. I enjoyed the work, but after a few years, I started feeling restless. I thought about joining the private sector, but then later on, I felt maybe I should stay on, go beyond analytical work, and get more involved in policy deliberations that could influence our economic and social outcomes. And since then, I've pursued this path as my life calling, initially as a civil servant and now in politics. And that means focusing all my efforts to continually think about how we can keep our economy strong and to create good jobs and better lives for Singaporeans. We all know that there are significant challenges in the road ahead. In the external environment, we have the war in Ukraine, deepening geopolitical rivalry, as well as changes in the global trading system. Domestically, we will run up against more binding constraints in land, labor, and carbon. Our population is aging rapidly, and more resources will be needed to meet our growing healthcare and social needs. All this has serious implications for Singapore and our future growth prospects. Some people think that the government is overly obsessed about growth, and we just want to grow at all costs. But that's not true. Our focus has always been to grow the economy, not for its own sake, but as a means to improve the lives of everyone in Singapore. We are also realistic about what will happen if our economy shrinks. People will lose hope about the future. The lower income groups will suffer the most, and cohesion and trust in society will start to fray. We have already seen this happen in many other advanced countries, and we do not want this to happen here in Singapore. So tonight, I will focus my remarks on how the government plans to deal with the twin challenges of inequality and mobility, especially in a more challenging environment. We have been thinking hard about these issues as part of the Forward Singapore exercise, and we aim to wrap up this exercise and release the final report soon. So what I'm sharing with you tonight, exclusively for economists and the ESS, is a preview of some of the recommendations and ideas in this upcoming report. Our first imperative is to advance the well-being of the broad middle in Singapore, to help them secure jobs with good salaries and enable their real incomes to grow, not just nominal, but real incomes. Then they will be able to tackle concerns over cost of living and enjoy rising standards of living over time. The best way to achieve this is through a strong and dynamic economy. And that means we must stay open to the world and build on our competitive strengths to attract quality investments and scale up our own homegrown enterprises. Having more high-value and productive companies in Singapore translates to better prospects for the broad middle. Look at the middle-income workers in Singapore over the past decade. A large proportion of them enjoy upward income mobility. And when we drill down further into the data, we find that many had in fact switched jobs. They moved to work in more productive firms, typically in a larger local company or a multinational enterprise. And that's why our median household income growth in Singapore over the last decade has been very strong compared to other major advanced economies like the US, UK, and Finland, as you can see in this chart. So when we have a strong economy, when we have productive firms and when we have workers working in these firms, they enjoy good income growth. Amidst tighter resource constraints, we will no longer be able to achieve effortless growth in Singapore. There will be more binding constraints on us, more trade-offs. It simply means we have to work doubly hard on economic restructuring and allow the forces of creative destruction to work through the economy. Government policy should facilitate this and not inadvertently prop up non-viable activities with low productivity. The churn will be painful and it has to be carefully managed, but it is essential so that limited resources, be it land, labor, or carbon, can be channeled to more productive areas. So this is our imperative in order to uplift and advance the well-being of the broad middle. We will need to work on business-level productivity. We also should continue to focus on the microeconomic logic of policies, whether it is congestion pricing or taxing carbon emissions, because all this ensures that scarce resources are allocated efficiently and they contribute towards more productive outcomes. Over the last decade, from 2012 to 2022, our total factor productivity, or TFP, grew at around 0.4% per annum. That's comparable to other advanced economies like Canada, US, and the UK. But we must strive to do better and further improve our TFP over the coming decade. Technology will be a key enabler. By leveraging on new game-changing technologies like generative AI across our economy, we can drive innovation, productivity growth, and ultimately incomes for our next bound. But every new technology wave brings about considerable disruption to workplaces and to jobs, and this will have to be carefully managed. This is not new because I remember in the early 90s, the changes in the workplaces when personal computers became widely used. My mother was then a teacher. She was very attached to her typewriter. All her work, exam scripts, everything done on typewriter. She found it very hard to adjust to using a computer. I couldn't quite understand it. Typewriter, computer, seems the same, but it was difficult for her. I tried to help her. Maybe I wasn't such a good teacher, but she was never fully comfortable, and she eventually opted for early retirement at 55. That's the computer wave. The disruption from AI will be even greater than what we had experienced back then. When I speak to CEOs of large firms, here and globally, they tell me their plans to use generative AI to drive greater efficiencies and transform their operations. This is not something that's going to happen in the distant future. It's already happening now, and the momentum will ramp up in the coming years. Many more workers, including PMEs, will find their existing job roles becoming obsolete. There will still be new jobs created and other opportunities for these workers, but it means everyone will have to be better prepared for multiple transitions in their careers. Older workers in their 40s and 50s are especially vulnerable. Many also have caregiving obligations, which can make it difficult for them to set aside sufficient time to meaningfully refresh their skills. The government will therefore need to do more to help our workers adjust to this quicker pace of change and churn in our economy. We have already been investing heavily in lifelong learning and reskilling through Skills Future. Since we launched Skills Future in 2015, government spending on continuing education and training has almost doubled to nearly $1 billion this year. But we can and we will do more. So we plan to step up investments in adult education and training and significantly strengthen Skills Future. as a key part of our social system. There are some areas which we are looking at, something that I think most people would immediately think of would be top-ups to the Skills Future credit for mid-career workers, looking at training allowances for mid-career workers who take time off to pursue full-time training, full-time longer-form courses, because when you take time off, not just for 1-2 days, but for months, who is going to pay your salary? So training allowances will help them pay their bills while they take time off to study and to get a significant new injection of skills. We're looking at support for career planning and guidance so that individuals can proactively improve their career progression prospects and resilience. We're looking at better job matching to help workers move into jobs that better utilize and reward their skills. We will also build on this revamped Skills Future system to provide support for workers who are involuntarily unemployed. For a long time, the government has been very cautious about introducing unemployment benefits for good reason, because we have seen the experiences in other countries where automatic unemployment benefits lead to negative outcomes. Those who receive such generous benefits find it more attractive to stay unemployed rather than get back to work. But looking at the faster pace of change and churn in our economy, we have revised and refreshed our thinking. We don't have to do this as an insurance scheme, but we can have a government-funded benefit, appropriately sized to help these workers tide through their immediate difficulties while supporting them to continue with their upskilling and job search and eventually bounce back stronger. So that's something we are working on too, and this will also be part of our expanded Skills Future system. So this is how we will continue to advance the well-being of our broad middle in Singapore by giving them maximum support to stay relevant and competitive in their skills and to take on new and better jobs in more productive companies throughout their careers. And through these efforts, we can ensure that the majority of Singaporeans enjoy continued increases in their real incomes and living standards. Our next priority is to uplift those in the lower income segments and to make ours a fairer and more equal society. On income inequality, we are in fact not doing too badly. Our efforts over the years to uplift lower wage workers have had a positive effect. Government moves like workfare, progressive wages, then the local qualifying salary for companies that hire migrant workers, all of these different moves have helped to ensure healthy income growth for our lower wage workers. Over the last 10 years, real income growth for workers at the 20th percentile income has risen faster than those at the median. As a result, our income inequality, as reflected in the Gini coefficient, has declined steadily over the past decade. So, people say income inequality has gone up, but certainly, as measured by the Gini coefficient, it has in fact been coming down steadily over the past decade. Our level of income inequality is on the lower end of the range amongst advanced economies before taxes and transfers are taken into account, as again you can see from this chart. After taxes and transfers, our income inequality is about the same as in places like the UK and lower than the US. We are nowhere near as equal as the Nordic countries and several others in the advanced world. That's true. But in these places, they have very high income and value-added taxes in order to achieve lower Gini coefficients. And these high income and high value-added taxes are applied not just for the very top, but also for the middle income. We have, in contrast, kept the overall tax burden relatively low for the vast majority of workers in Singapore. Our fiscal system is also highly progressive. Take income taxes as an example. Our top marginal rate is 22%. It will be raised to 24% in 2024. But our income tax schedule is also complemented by workfare. So if you are older with lower income, you will get an additional income supplement of $4,200 per year from the government, which means our effective income tax schedule is around 50 percentage points wide, from 22% for the top income earners going up to 24%, all the way down to as low as negative 28% for our senior lower income workers. It's a very progressive schedule. That's for income. So we will continue to work on income inequality and make progress. We are also paying attention to wealth inequality, because that's another source of inequality. Ideally, we would like to tax the net wealth of individuals. Ideally. Certainly MOF would like to do so. But it is very difficult to implement this effectively, because financial wealth is mobile, very mobile, and difficult to track. Every country faces this problem, not just Singapore. So what's our next best option? We have focused instead on taxing property, which is a key source of wealth for many in Singapore. We recently increased our taxes on higher-end properties significantly through higher property tax and stamp duties. Some Singaporeans say, I am asset-rich but cash-poor. And we understand, because we all know of retirees who live in a private property and are worried about having insufficient income to meet their daily needs. And that's why from time to time, the government will extend support for this group. For example, we cover many of them through one-off support measures like the CDC vouchers that's given to every household regardless of your housing type. And a number of them, even those living in private properties, also receive the permanent GST vouchers. So we have not left them out. In fact, the recent property tax changes, which we announced in the budget, will impact owner-occupied properties with annual values of more than $30,000, as well as those which are non-owner-occupied. Non-owner-occupied, I think they should, if you can purchase more than one property, I think you pay your share of taxes. If you're owner-occupied, it applies only to those with AVs above $30,000 annual values. AV is a very complex and difficult concept for people to understand. I guarantee, I make a bet, if I ask you what is the AV of the home you are living in, no one knows. How many of you know the AV of the home that you're living in? But if I ask you what's the price of your property, I bet you know that answer, right? Well, it's related. It's actually related. It's just that we use AV for calculating property tax. If you are lucky enough to live in a property with AV more than $30,000, it's very likely to be a higher-end condominium or a landed property worth more than a few $1 million. That's what it comes down to. That's not a small asset by any means. And those who are prepared to right-size, of course, will be able to unlock a sizable amount of wealth for their retirement, or they can choose to stay in the same place and monetize part of their home asset through a home equity loan, offered commercially by several financial institutions. Nevertheless, we are reviewing and studying how some of these schemes can be made more accessible and attractive to seniors preparing for retirement. So that's on the wealth side. While we tax the wealthy, we also help the lower income build up their wealth. For example, through generous subsidies for the lower income to purchase a HDB flat, as well as more support for those with lower CPF balances. So these are mechanisms for wealth transfers, enabling us to help the lower income segments purchase their own homes and build up their nest eggs for retirement. We will continue to review and enhance our schemes to uplift the incomes and wealth of the more disadvantaged groups and close our income and wealth gaps over time. We are focusing on one key segment, which is our ITE students and graduates. And there has been a growing divergence between the starting salaries of graduates from ITE, polytechnics, and autonomous universities over the past decade. Their starting salaries have all increased meaningfully over time in real terms, but those with higher qualifications, especially our university graduates, have been pulling further ahead, as you can see. It's not surprising. It reflects the college wage premium that exists everywhere in the world. But the college wage premium is probably on the higher side in Singapore. And this shows up in our economy too. It's reflected in the occupational wage disparities between those who engage in more knowledge-based or head work, like managers and professionals, versus those who engage in more hands and heart work, like technicians and service workers. So look at this ratio of median occupational wages against the national median wage. In other words, this reflects how much a certain occupation earns compared to the median worker. For our PMEs, professionals, managers, executives, the ratio is broadly comparable to other advanced countries. But for service and technical hands-on role, our ratio is about half that of other countries. To be clear, we will not be able to completely remove wage disparities in the economy, but too large a wage difference will create problems. It is partly the source of education anxiety and stress as well, because parents and children worry about getting to the right pathways that will lead to the right jobs for the future. So we must do all we can to reduce these wage gaps, encourage more diverse pathways, and instill dignity and respect for every job, every vocation, and every skill. And we will do this industry by industry, redesigning jobs, raising productivity, upgrading skills, and establishing better progression pathways. We have made good progress in certain sectors like preschool education and nursing, and we are looking at how we can do the same for other services and professional trades. And with these industry efforts, and working closely with our educators at ITE, we aim to push up the starting salaries of our ITE graduates. At the same time, we will help our ITE graduates upgrade their skills over time. They could enroll in a work-study diploma or a part-time diploma and gain industry-relevant skills. When they do so, preferably early in life, they get onto a better career progression pathway with bigger job roles and better pay. So we will also think of ways to do more to help our ITE graduates in their upgrading journey. Of course, the government cannot do all this single-handedly. It will require all of us as employers, also as consumers, to recognize the important work that our fellow citizens undertake to keep our society going and do our part to uplift their progress. All will gain when even the most vulnerable amongst us become better off. We will become a better people and a more just and equal society. Third, even as we close inequality gaps, we must ensure that our society remains socially mobile. Our relative social mobility remains higher than in other advanced economies, meaning if you are born lower income segments, the chances of you getting to a higher income group, that's still quite good in Singapore. But focusing on relative mobility has its limits. There is a tendency to look at this as a zero-sum game, because when someone goes up, someone else has to come down. So what's more important is to ensure absolute mobility so that everyone keeps moving up. And in particular, our focus should be children from more disadvantaged and vulnerable backgrounds so as to prevent inequalities from being transmitted to the next generation. We know that the early years are critical for a child's development, and that's why the government has invested significantly in this area. And we have a whole range of different programs now, Kids Start, to equip and engage lower-income parents with the knowledge and skills to support their children's development and to address learning delays and health issues early on. We have expanded affordable and quality preschool places substantially over the years, with more subsidies going for the lower income segments. And we will continue to spare no effort in ensuring every child has a good start in life. We are also making a concerted effort through something called ComLink to provide more holistic support to families living in rental flats with young children. We are taking a family-centric approach where caseworkers and befrienders come together to support every family one by one, find out their concerns and see what we can do to better support them. It requires a lot more work and effort on the ground because we know that the issues these families face are very complex. There may be marital stress, addiction problems, bad debts to resolve, or even motivation and self-confidence issues to address. So making progress on all of these issues isn't just about giving more financial transfers. It often requires very intensive engagement and hand-holding by the case workers. Volunteer befrienders play an important role because they can help talk to the parents, serve as mentors to the children, give them access to opportunities and networks, and provide them with good counsel and advice. We have to be realistic about what we can achieve in the short term, but in the end, this is the best way to encourage and empower families to achieve success and to sustain their progress. One way to better support this work is to provide additional support that is tied to specific action plans that the families themselves take responsibility for. Because we want these families to feel empowered in taking active steps towards achieving their own long-term goals, like staying employed, getting a good job, saving to buy a home, or ensuring their children attend preschool and school regularly. And so if families take steps towards these goals, then the government could provide them with higher and longer-term financial payouts. This can help reduce their short-term financial pressures while reinforcing their efforts to improve their life circumstances. So far, I've spoken about supporting the broad middle and uplifting the lower income. What about those who are better off? Take, for example, the top 20% of households in Singapore. The 80th percentile earns close to $20,000 a month for a 3-person household. In fact, that puts our high earners within the top 5% and possibly even in the top 1% globally in terms of income. So this group has done very well for themselves. They are undoubtedly talented and hardworking, and they have been well rewarded for this. But like all groups, the higher income segments also face their share of stresses. Some of these pressures may arise because people compare their lot with that of others. I'm reminded of a study done in Harvard in the late 1990s. Participants were asked to choose between two options. First option, you can earn $50,000 a year, but everybody else gets $25,000. Second option, you earn $100,000 a year, everybody else earns $200,000. Which will you choose? Option 1 or option 2? If we do a poll in this room, it will be very interesting because as economists, you should know that the rational choice is option 2. $100,000 is more than $50,000. But interestingly, in the survey, majority preferred the first option. They were happy with less as long as they were better off than others. I earn $50,000, but everyone else earns $25,000. Forget about the $100,000. This is not just unique to this survey. Other studies have shown that people are often more concerned about their income relative to others than about their own absolute income. Happiness at your own pay vanishes very quickly when you learn that your colleague has been given more. The implication is that beyond a certain point, more money does not automatically make you happier. In fact, if the chase for more material success is motivated solely by social status and peer approval, it will be self-defeating. You may make more money, but because others do as well, you will never feel happier. And you just keep on going on this endless rat race. A better way is to focus on your own life goals and succeed on your own terms. There is no need to feel trapped by hyper-competitive social norms or get caught up in an endless rat race simply to outdo the people around you. In fact, the top 20% of Singapore society is already today the largest contributors to tax revenues. Understandably, they sometimes feel that the government is not doing enough to help them. But if you look at the broader picture, their tax burden is significantly lower than what they would be paying in most other cities or countries. And for the relatively low amount of taxes paid, they enjoy many benefits in Singapore. A clean, green, orderly, and stable society that works, excellent public infrastructure, good schools and tertiary institutions with highly subsidized fees, and opportunities aplenty for them to excel. And these are not small things. From time to time, you come across people who mistakenly attribute their success entirely to their own efforts and hard work. But we must remember that a large part of our success is down to the society we live in. It's because we operate in a Singapore system that we are able to thrive and excel. The bottom line is that no one succeeds alone. We truly succeed only when we succeed together as a society. So those who have done well in life should feel a sense of responsibility to do their part and help uplift their fellow citizens. Some of this will indeed be achieved through taxes and government transfers. But if everything is done through the fiscal system, we end up with high taxes, not just for the top, but for the broad middle too. More and more things will be done by a state administration which can never match the compassion and personal touch that community support provides. So we should do more to strengthen our culture of giving and philanthropy in Singapore. This must be an integral part of our system and a key feature in our social compact, which is individuals here, Singaporeans, enjoy the opportunity to generate and accumulate wealth, but part of that wealth must be recycled and invested back into society to expand opportunity for others. In Singapore, the legacy of our early philanthropists, like Tan Tock Seng, Lee Kong Chian, Syed Omar, Hajjah Fatimah, just to name a few, is still keenly felt today. Philanthropic giving in our society has been on the rise, but compared to other countries like America, we still have some way to go. In Singapore, and across all Asian societies, there is a deeply entrenched mindset to bequeath wealth to the next generation within the family. In America, the wealthy are more prepared to give away the majority of their wealth to charity. As one of their billionaires said, "I don't want to deprive my children of the opportunity to make their own money. So better give most of my wealth to charity instead." We ought to re-examine our own attitudes and consider ways to strengthen our philanthropic culture. It's good that we want, as Asians, as Singaporeans, to look after our own families. But perhaps we should look at family in a wider context, not just our children or our grandchildren or even our immediate relatives, but people in our wider community, everyone who belongs to our Singapore family. And over time, I hope many more in Singapore who have done well for themselves will set aside larger and larger proportions of their wealth for our broader Singapore family. And these contributions go beyond financial donations. They can adopt causes they feel strongly about and work with the government on social initiatives that make a difference. Our efforts to build a fairer and more inclusive society cannot be limited to just monetary redistribution by the government. It must involve the community to engage the human spirit, to provide personal fulfillment, and to strengthen collective well-being. It must strengthen the culture of responsibility for one another so that we all feel a sense of duty to each other and not just a right to the benefits of citizenship. To conclude, these are some of the key ideas for Forward Singapore. Not comprehensive, but certainly some of the key ideas we have developed. This is an agenda for our next phase of nation building, which has been co-created and shaped together with the many Singaporeans we engaged over the past year. We want to ensure that Singapore remains a place where everyone can progress throughout life and forge fulfilling and dignified lives with greater assurance for today and for tomorrow. To realize these shared goals, we will need to change and do some things differently, and I've shared some of these changes earlier. We will also need to hold firm to some core values and principles, like our strong sense of kinship and trust in each other, our close tripartite partnership, and above all, our enduring belief that we are one united people. The government plays a key role in this process, but in the end, it's not just about government policies, but about our collective actions to nurture an ethos of solidarity and shared responsibility, where every Singaporean contributes and does our part to uplift our fellow citizens. This is how we can confront our challenges with confidence and keep the Singapore story going for many more years to come. Thank you very much.